Hey guys, so this is part 3, and in the background we have The Night We Met by Lord Huron. Oh my gosh, it's such a sweet song, and I'll put the link in the description. It's the same for the for part 1 and part 2. It's the same playlist as just playing from that. Let's get into it. The library was cloaked in a hushed reverence. The kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards and every turn of a page sound impossibly loud. The lamps glowed faintly, casting pools of golden light that barely touched the farthest corners of the cavernous room. The air smelled of aged parchment and the fang tang of ink. A strangely comforting scent despite the oppressive tension that had hung over Hogwarts ever since Umbridge seized control. You had come to the library seeking solace, a moment to collect your thoughts after another grueling day. But as you meandered between the towering shelves, your thoughts strayed to Draco Malfoy. He had been acting strangely for weeks now, quieter, more withdrawn. The sharp barbs and smug smirks that had once defined him seemed fewer and further between. You had noticed the way he lingered in hallways as if lost in thought, the way his gaze seemed to drift during lessons, and the way he hunched his shoulders as though carrying a weight no one else could see. Rounding a corner, you spotted him. Not rounding a quarter. Rounding a corner, you spotted him. Draco was seated at a table in one of the library's darkest of closes, surrounded by a chaotic array of books, scrolls, and parchment. His normally pristine robes were rumpled, and his hair, usually combed to perfection, was slightly disheveled. He gripped his quill so tightly that his knuckles were white, the scratching of the nib against the parchment the only sound in the otherwise silent corner. For a moment, you just stood there, watching him. His head was bowed low, and his shoulders were tense, rising and falling with each shallow breath. He looked so unlike the confident, untouchable boy you were used to. He looked overwhelmed. You debated leaving. Whatever he was struggling with, it wasn't your business. But something stopped you. Maybe it was the memory of his steady hands wrapping your bandaged one in the corridor weeks ago, or the vulnerable expression you'd seen on his face during your encounter at Hagrid's hut. Whatever the reason, you found yourself stepping closer. "Draco?" you said softly, your voice barely above a whisper. His quill stilled instantly, his entire body going rigid. For a moment, he didn't look up, and you thought he might ignore you. Then he exhaled slowly, setting the quill down with deliberate care before lifting his head. "What do you want?" He asked, his voice very. His gray eyes, usually so sharp and cold, were dull with exhaustion. You hesitated. Up close, he looked even worse than you realized. The dark circles under his eyes suggest he hadn't slept properly in days, and there was a faint redness to his fingertips, likely from hours of writing without pause. "I could ask you the same thing," you said, gesturing to the pile of books around him. "What are you doing here so late?" "Studying," he said flatly, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Studying or punishing yourself?" you countered, raising an eyebrow. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment you thought he might lash out. But instead, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "What do you care?" he mumbled. "I care because you look like you're about to collapse," you said honestly. "You've been off lately, I've noticed." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Of course you've noticed. Can't have your favorite rival falling apart, can you? Who do you compete with then?" You rolled your eyes, but didn't rise to the bait. "I'm serious, Draco. You're not yourself." He scoffed, but the sound lacked its usual venom. "What exactly am I supposed to be?" The question hung in the air, heavier than you expected. "Draco," you said softly, stepping closer. "What's going on? Really?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the stack of books in front of him, his fingers idly tracing the edge of one. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You wouldn't understand," he said. not looking at you. Maybe not, you said, but you could try me. He sighed, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table, his hands folded together, his fingers twitching nervously. You ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough? His words surprised you, but you kept your expression neutral. Sometimes, you admitted. He nodded slightly, as if your answer gave him permission to continue. That's my whole life, he said bitterly. Being a Malfoy isn't just a name, it's an expectation. Every move I make, every word I say, it's all supposed to uphold this image. No matter how hard I try, it's never enough. Not for my father, not for anyone. You sat down across from him, your movements slow and deliberate, as if afraid to spook him. Is that why you've been punishing yourself? Oh, Jesus, no. Is that why? I'm sorry. I read it wrong and I freaked out. Is that why you've been pushing yourself so hard? He let out a hollow laugh. Pushing myself? No, this isn't about me. It's about them, my father, my family. My father thinks... He cut himself off, his jaw tightening. Thinks what? You prompted gently. That I'm weak, he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. That I don't have what it takes to live up to the Malfoy name, and maybe he's right. The vulnerability in his voice was startling. You had always seen Draco as untouchable, his confidence unshakable, but here he was, raw and exposed, a boy weighed down by expectations he hadn't chosen. You're not weak, he said firmly. He looked down at you then. No, I read it wrong again. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Sorry, my brain's been tired lately. He looked up at you then, his gray eyes meeting yours for the first time since you'd sat down. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. Doubt, hope, maybe both. You don't know me, he said quietly. Maybe not, you admitted. But I know what I see. And I see someone who's caring a lot more than they should have to. That doesn't make you weak, Draco. It makes you human. His lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he looked away, his gaze fixed on the flickering lantern in the corner. For a long time, neither of you spoke. The silence between you wasn't uncomfortable, though. It felt safe. Finally, Draco broke the silence. It's exhausting, pretending all the time, he said softly. You don't have to pretend with me, he said. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. He didn't respond, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. For the rest of the evening, you stayed there, in the quiet corner of the library. You didn't push him to say more, and he didn't ask you to leave. It was enough to simply be there, sharing the silence. And in that moment, something between you shifted, the walls of rivalry and pretense beginning to crumble. And that's the end of part 3. I might go on to make part 4 or like another series to continue it, where you guys actually, well, I don't know if you guys can just become friends or like get together or something. But yeah, I was also thinking about possibly doing a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions for that, feel free to leave some in the comments, and I will 100% add those to the video and do whatever. It could be our 60 subscribers special, if you guys want, or just some random ones, because we are officially at 61 subscribers, at 16 videos, and I am so happy. I did not think I'd even get past, 4, so, this is a big thing for me, and I love you all, and I'm just so happy that you guys actually like my stuff, and that you want more, and yeah, so thank you, and I love you, my losers. Bye!